the histories of forgotten Appalachian villages. To do that, we need a story. A story like that of Mary Lee, who lived in a village that's now just a memory. A collection of fading photographs and scattered stones along a creek in the heart of Kentucky. Her story isn't just her own. It's the story of a way of life that has all but vanished, and of the powerful, relentless forces that conspired to wash it all away. To understand why her home disappeared, we first have to understand the world that created it. Deep in the Appalachian Mountains, the forest is holding on to its secrets. It wraps itself around the bones of old houses and whispers through the broken panes of forgotten churches. Entire villages, once teeming with life, have just vanished. Their stories are being swallowed by the trees, their names fading from maps and from memory. You've probably driven past the signs of them without even knowing. A patch of daffodils blooming in a perfect square, way out in the woods. A single stone chimney standing guard on a lonely ridge. The faint dip of an old road that now leads to nowhere. These are the ghosts of Appalachia. Not specters or spirits, but the real, tangible echoes of communities that lived and loved and worked, and then, for reasons both simple and heartbreakingly complex, disappeared. We're drawn to these places because they ask us a silent question. What happened here? Who were the people that called this wilderness home? And why did they leave? Usually, the answers are as scattered and overgrown as the ruins. But what if we could piece one of those stories back together? What if one family's journey could light up the past and reveal why their home was erased from the map? Section 1. The Land That Remembers. Appalachia. The name itself carries so much weight. For some, it conjures images of poverty and isolation, stereotypes that have been pushed on the region for a century. For others, it's a place of breathtaking beauty, of ancient, mist-shrouded mountains that are among the oldest on Earth. The thing is, both are true, and neither tells the whole story. The reality of this place is woven from both hardship and a fierce, resilient beauty. The mountains themselves shape the people. Starting back in the 18th century, settlers, mostly Scots-Irish and German immigrants, pushed into these formidable hills and hollows. They weren't looking for fortunes. They were looking for solitude and self-sufficiency. These were people tired of landlords and wars, searching for a piece of land they could call their own, a place to be left alone. The rugged terrain pretty much guaranteed their wish for isolation would be granted. They built their lives in the narrow valleys, or hollers, creating small, scattered settlements connected by little more than footpaths and creek beds. This geography created a unique culture, one built on an almost absolute reliance on two things: the land and your nearest neighbor. Survival meant you knew how to read the seasons, how to coax life from rocky soil, how to hunt, build, and heal using the plants from the forest. And for any skill you lacked, you relied on the community, a tight-knit web of families bound together by necessity, marriage, and a shared understanding of mountain life. It was a world unto itself, but it was also a fragile world. That isolation was its greatest strength, but it would also become its greatest vulnerability. These communities existed like tiny islands in a sea of green, and when the tides of the outside world began to rise, they had little to protect them. The logging companies came first, then the coal companies, pulling the region's wealth out from under its feet and changing the economy forever. By the early 20th century, a new kind of town had appeared alongside the old farmsteads, the company town, where your landlord, your grocer, and your boss were all the same. This created a landscape of contrasts. On one hand, you had ancient farming communities that hadn't changed much in 150 years. On the other, you had industrial boomtowns that depended on a single industry. Both, in their own way, were balanced on a knife's edge. When those industries stumbled, or when the national economy collapsed, the fall was swift and brutal. And so, the forgetting began. A mine closes, a railroad line is pulled up, a lumber company moves on, and a town's whole reason for being just evaporates. Families leave, one by one, looking for work in the cities. Houses are left empty. Then the forest, which was always waiting at the edges, begins its slow, quiet work of taking back over. It's a story that's played out 1,000 times in 1,000 hollers. But to really understand it, we have to look past the broad strokes of history and find the human heart of the story. We have to find a name, a face, a home. We have to find our way to Pawpaw Creek, in Casey County, Kentucky, and to the Gadbury Farm. Section 2. A Name on the Wind. Introducing Mary Lee. In the late 1800s, after the Civil War, life along Pawpaw Creek in rural Casey County, Kentucky, went on much as it had before. This wasn't a town like we think of one now. It was a sparse collection of farms and log cabins nestled in the hills. Community wasn't defined by a main street, but by the shared geography of the Creek Valley and the web of kinship that connected everyone. This is the world a girl like Mary Lee Gadbury would have been born into on October 23, 1876. Her world was both immense and incredibly small. The nearest big town, Somerset, was a 40-mile journey. In an era of horse-drawn wagons on rough, rutted roads, that wasn't a casual trip. It was a major undertaking, maybe a week-long affair, planned only when absolutely necessary. This profound isolation meant one thing above all: self-sufficiency wasn't a choice. It was the fundamental rule of life. The Gadbury farm, like its neighbors, had to produce almost everything the family needed to survive. What they couldn't grow or build, they'd trade for with their neighbors. A blacksmith, a miller, a barrel maker. These were the pillars of the local economy, their skills traded for flour, meat, or labor. It was a community woven together by intimate, daily reliance. A girl like Mary Lee would have grown up in a log cabin, built by hand from the trees that surrounded it. Her childhood was a world away from ours, a life dictated by the sun and the seasons, a life of what the old records just call endless hard work. From the time she could walk, she would have had chores. Her world was filled with the sounds of farm life, the lowing of cattle, the crow of a rooster, the rhythmic thud of an axe splitting firewood, and the songs her mother Amanda might have sung while working at the hearth. She would have known the smell of damp earth in the spring, of hay curing in the summer sun, of wood smoke on the cold winter air. Her hands would have known the feel of soil, the rough bark of a tree, the smooth handle of a butter churn. Education was a luxury, and often took a back seat to the urgent needs of the farm. The world beyond the Creek Valley must have seemed as distant as a dream. In 1893, just before her 17th birthday, Mary Lee married a local man, Eli Palestine Murphy, and soon had 2 daughters, Margaret and Betty. Her life was following the path laid out for generations of Appalachian women: marriage, motherhood, and the ceaseless work of keeping a family and a home together in this demanding landscape. She was weaving her own thread into the community's fabric. But Mary Lee's story is tragically short. In 1899, at just 23, she died. The cause is lost to history, like so many details of these lives. Childbirth, sickness, and accident. Any of these could claim a life with shocking speed when a doctor was miles and hours away. She was buried in Casey County, her life a brief, complete chapter in the story of the Gadbury farm. Her early death means she never saw the huge changes that were coming. She never saw the world that would slowly, piece by piece, dismantle the life she knew. But her family, the Gadburys and the Murphys, would live through it. And the farm she called home would become a silent witness to the slow, unstoppable disappearance of a way of life. A process that was already beginning, whispering on the wind like a warning of the future. The story of why her home was forgotten is really the story of what happened next, to the people and the land she left behind. Section 3. The Rhythm of the Land. To understand what was lost, we have to understand what it was. We have to slow down and live, for a moment, in the world of the Gadbury farm in the early 1900s, after Mary Lee was gone, but while her family and her way of life carried on. It was a life lived in a constant dance with the seasons. It was a life of profound knowledge, skill, and grueling, unrelenting labor. Spring on the farm was a time of frantic energy. First things first, breaking the ground. Long before tractors, this meant a man, a mule, and a plow in a slow struggle with the rocky soil. The fields had to be prepared for the staple crops, especially corn. Corn was everything. It was food for the family as cornbread and grits, and it was feed for the livestock. They'd also plant beans, potatoes, and squash in a large garden near the house, a space that was mostly the women's domain. The orchards mentioned in the family's history were another critical piece of the puzzle. Spring meant carefully pruning the apple and pear trees, a skill passed down through generations. A healthy orchard meant fruit for eating fresh, for preserving for the winter, and for making cider, vinegar, and apple butter. It was another vital layer of their self-sufficiency. As spring bled into summer, the work changed but never lessened. Crops needed constant attention. The rows of corn and vegetables had to be hoed to keep the weeds down, a hot, monotonous task for everyone, including the children. Summer was the season of growth. Laying by the corn was a milestone. It meant the stalks were finally tall enough to shade out the weeds on their own, and the most intense work was over. For the women, summer was also the start of preservation season. As the first vegetables ripened, the work of canning, pickling, and drying began. This wasn't a hobby, it was a race against spoilage. The kitchen, with its wood-fired stove, would get unbearably hot as women and girls spent countless hours over boiling pots, sealing the summer's bounty into glass jars. A well-stocked cellar, full of colorful jars of beans, tomatoes, and jams, was a family's pride and its security against the lean winter months. Then came autumn, the season of harvest. This was maybe the most intense period of all. The corn had to be cut and shucked, the potatoes dug, the pumpkins gathered. The apples had to be picked. This was often a communal time. A corn shucking could be a social event, with neighbors gathering to help, turning a mountain of work into an occasion for storytelling and fellowship. Autumn was also hog-killing time. Hogs were the main source of meat. In the late fall, when the weather turned cold, the hogs would be slaughtered. It was a messy, difficult, but essential job. Every single part of the animal was used. Hams and bacon were cured with salt and hung in the smokehouse. Fat was rendered into lard for cooking and soap making. Nothing was wasted. It was a stark but necessary part of the cycle of life and death on the farm. As the pantry filled and the smokehouse hung heavy with curing meat, a sense of security would settle over the homestead. They had once again wrestled a year's worth of life from the land. Finally, winter would close in. The days grew short and cold. But winter wasn't a time of rest. It was a time for the work that was impossible during the busy planting and harvesting seasons. For men, it meant mending tools, repairing harnesses, and splitting a massive pile of firewood. For women, the work moved indoors. It was the season of spinning wool into thread, of weaving cloth on a loom, of quilting, piecing together scraps of old fabric into warm, beautiful blankets. Winter nights were long, spent close to the fireplace. This was the time for storytelling, for passing down family histories and local legends, for playing music on a fiddle or a banjo. It was in these quiet, dark months that the culture of the community was passed on to the next generation. This was the rhythm of the Gadbury farm, a life of incredible hardship and profound satisfaction. Every meal was the result of their own sweat and planning. Their home was built with their own hands. They were beholden to no one. But this intricate, self-contained world depended entirely on the families staying together, on the children learning the old ways and carrying them on. And that was the one thing the farm couldn't control. Section 4. The Unraveling. For generations, the world of the Gadbury farm was stable because it was contained. But in the early 20th century, the walls of that world began to thin. The unraveling didn't happen all at once. It was a slow, quiet erosion, a series of waves, each one washing away a little more of the foundation. The first whisper of change wasn't a threat. It was a promise. The promise of a different life. New roads began cutting through the mountains, tentative fingers of gravel and dirt connecting isolated hollows to the wider world. A trip that once took days could now be done in hours. Young people, like Mary Lee's children, might go to Somerset and see a different way of living. A life with electricity, with stores where you could buy food, with schools that ran for a full term, and with jobs that paid a cash wage. Then the Great Depression hit Appalachia with a unique kind of fury. The region's major industries, lumber and coal, were already struggling. For families on subsistence farms like the Gadburys, the initial stock market crash might have seemed remote. In some ways, they were better insulated than city dwellers. They grew their own food. But the secondary effects were devastating. The price for any crops they might sell for cash collapsed. Any small hope of getting ahead was extinguished. The Depression also sent a wave of people back to the farms. Family members who had left for factory jobs were now unemployed and came home, adding more mouths to feed and putting more pressure on tired land. For the first time, staying on the farm no longer guaranteed survival. The land, which had always been their provider, was now struggling to support them. Government relief efforts like the New Deal did reach Appalachia. The Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, provided jobs for young men building roads and parks. These programs were lifelines, but they also acted as powerful advertisements for a world beyond the farm. They offered a steady wage, a path that didn't depend on the weather. If the Depression cracked the foundation of the old way of life, World War II was the event that broke it wide open. The war created an unprecedented demand for labor in the industrial cities of the North and Midwest, in the steel mills of Pittsburgh, the auto factories of Detroit, the rubber plants of Akron. For the young men and women of Appalachia, this was an escape. It was a patriotic duty, but it was also an economic opportunity unlike any they had ever known. Young men from farms like the Gadburys went off to fight and saw a world they could never have imagined from a porch on Pawpaw Creek. Many who survived had no desire to return to the back-breaking labor and isolation of the farm. Women, too, left for the factories, earning their own money for the first time and experiencing the independence of city life. This mass exodus, which continued after the war, was the single greatest demographic shift in Appalachian history. It hollowed out the mountains. The family unit, the essential engine of the subsistence farm, was broken. The old rhythm of the land required everyone to play their part. When the young people left, the system collapsed. We see this reflected in the story of the Gadbury farm. As the decades passed, the farm was passed to the next generation, but their lives were different. Some may have stayed, but their brothers, sisters, and cousins had moved away. The vibrant community of neighbors began to thin out. The blacksmith moved away. The small grist mill on the creek closed down. The original log cabin where Mary Lee was born became a symbol of this change. At some point, the family moved into a newer home. The old cabin, the heart of the homestead, was abandoned, but it wasn't torn down. In a move full of poignant symbolism, it was carefully dismantled and stored away in a barn. It was an act of preservation, but also an admission that its time had passed. They were saving the memory of a life they were no longer living. The farm itself lingered on. It became a place of nostalgia, a spot for family reunions where the scattered generations could gather. But it was no longer the center of their universe. It was a touchstone to the past, not a plan for the future. The unraveling was nearly complete. Section 5. The forest reclaims its own. When a family leaves a home in the mountains, the process of forgetting isn't just in your head. It's a physical process. It happens slowly, then all at once. For the Gadbury farm, after the younger generations left, after the old log cabin was put away like an heirloom, the land began to breathe again. At first, the change is subtle. The fields, once cleared of every rock, start to soften. The next season, they aren't replanted. Instead, weeds and wildflowers sprout in a chaotic tangle. Within a few years, saplings of poplar and pine push their way through the grasses, their roots finding purchase in soil that was tilled for a century. The house itself starts to show the strain. A loose shingle lets the rain in. A cracked window pane is not replaced. Wind and rain now have an entry point, peeling away wallpaper and warping the floorboards. The paint on the outside flakes away, and the wood turns a soft, silvery gray. The paths connecting the house to the barn and the spring house begin to fade under a thick layer of fallen leaves each year. Soon, a clear path is just a suggestion in the undergrowth. This quiet, gradual process is different from the fate of other Appalachian ghost towns. Take a place like Elkmont, Tennessee. It started as a logging community and then became a resort town for wealthy families. Its abandonment wasn't a slow decline, but a legal process. When the Great Smoky Mountains National Park was established, residents had to sell their properties. Many were given lifetime leases, but as those expired, the town emptied out methodically. Elkmont became a ghost town by committee, its remaining buildings now preserved by the National Park Service as a historical district. The fate of a family farm on Pawpaw Creek is more organic, more intimate. There's no committee, no preservation plan. There is only the slow letting go. Old fences fall, the wires swallowed by the bark of growing trees. Old farm equipment rusts in the fields, sinking slowly into the earth. The stone chimney is often the last to go. It stands for decades after the wooden house around it has collapsed, a lonely monument on the landscape. It marks the spot that was once the heart of the home. Finding one deep in the woods is like finding a tombstone for a house. For Mary Lee's home, the process was sealed by the family's own actions. By storing the original cabin away, they performed the first act of burial. The rest was left to time and the patient, unstoppable advance of the forest. The memories of her life, of the rhythm of the land, of the community that thrived along the creek, they were all tied to these physical things. As the buildings decayed and the fields were reclaimed, the story itself became unmoored, fading with the generation that held it. The story of Mary Lee's forgotten home is the story of countless places like it, hidden in the folds of these ancient mountains. It's a story of profound change, of a self-sufficient world washed away by the tides of an industrializing nation. The reasons for its disappearance aren't a mystery. They're economic and social. The decline of small farming, the Great Depression, the call of jobs in faraway cities. These forces unraveled a way of life that had endured for more than a century. What is lost isn't just a collection of old buildings. When a place like this vanishes, we lose a connection to a kind of human resilience that's hard to imagine in our modern world. We lose the knowledge of how to live with the land, not just on it. We lose the stories of the people who paid the price for progress, who traded a life of hardship and independence for a new world of wages and convenience. The old Gadbury farm is gone now, swallowed by the Kentucky woods. Mary Lee's original cabin, stored away in a barn, may have rotted into dust, or it may still be there, a collection of hand-hewn logs waiting for a story to be told. Her brief life is an anchor point, a reminder that these broad historical forces are ultimately personal stories, played out in the lives of individual families. Her home was forgotten because a way of living became impossible to sustain. And the forest, which was there long before the first cabin was built, simply took back what was always its own. Our act of remembering is the only thing that holds the forest back, even for just a moment. The history of Appalachia is written in the stories of its people, and so many of these stories are in danger of being lost forever. If this one resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. More importantly, if you have a family story, a memory of a place or a person from this region, share it in the comments below. Let's work together to keep these memories alive, to tell the story of Appalachia, one piece at a time. Thank you for watching.